morning, good afternoon, or good evening from wherever you're watching or listening. My name is Caleb Glick. I'm a lawyer here in the great state of Texas with the Calhoun School of Law to bring you a lot of information plenty of bad folks would rather you not have. For today's lecture, ladies and gentlemen, we'll provide another installment into our series on Mr. John Locke's Two Treatises of Government. Now we're going on to Chapter 2, so if you haven't gone back and watched Chapter 1, I would highly encourage you to do so, because Mr. John Locke, like Algernon Sidney, sometimes directly referenced by the founding generation, significantly influenced the thinking of the founding generation. So like Mr. Sidney's work, whenever you go about trying to understand the U.S. Constitution or all of these other founding documents, all of these other important documents to U.S. governance, to truly understand the rudimentary principles and ideas that the founding generation depended upon for writing those documents and for conjuring up these governments, going through John Locke's writings will greatly help in that endeavor and completing that task. So let's go ahead and jump on over to the Two Treatises of Government and see what Mr. Locke has to say in Chapter 2, which is summarily titled Of Paternal and Regal Power. He says here in subsection 6, Sir Robert Filmer's great position is that, quote, men are not naturally free. This is the foundation on which his absolute monarchy stands, and from which it erects itself to an height that its power is above every power. Caput inter nubilia, so high above all earthly and human things that thought can scarce reach it, that promises and oaths which tie the infinite deity cannot confine it. But if this foundation fails, all his fabric falls with it, and governments must be left again to the old way of being made by contrivance and the consent of men, making use of their reason to unite together into society. To prove this grand position of his, he tells us, I think it's supposed to be abbreviation for paragraph or page, 12, quote, men are born in subjection to their parents, and therefore cannot be free. And this authority of parents he calls, quote, royal authority. Further on page 12 through 14, or 12 and 14, quote, fatherly authority, right of fatherhood, pages 12 and 20. One would have thought he would, in the beginning of such a work as this, on which was to depend the authority of princes and the obedience of subjects, have told us expressly what that fatherly authority is, have definer it, though not limited it, because in some other treatises of his, he tells us it is unlimited and unlimitable. He should at least have given us such an account of it that we might have had an entire notion of this fatherhood or fatherly authority whenever it came in our way in his writings. This I expected to have found in the first chapter of his Patriarchal, but instead thereof, having en passant made his obeisance to the Arcana Imperii, made his obeisance to the Arcana Imperii, made his compliment to the, quote, rights and liberties of this or any other nation, which he is going presently to null and destroy. And 3, made his leg to those learned men who did not see so far into the matter as himself. He comes to fall on Bellarmine, and by a victory over him establishes his fatherly authority beyond any question. Now, Bellarmine being rooted by his own confession, the day is clear got, and there is no more need of any forces. For having done that, I observe not that he states the question, or rallies up any arguments to make good his opinion, but rather tells us the story as he thinks fit of this strange kind of domineering phantom called the fatherhood, which whoever could catch presently got empire and unlimited absolute power. He acquaints us how this fatherhood liege in Adam continued its course and kept the world in order all the time of the patriarchs till the flood. Got out of the ark with Noah and his sons, made and supported all the kings of the earth till the captivity of the Israelites in Egypt, and then the poor fatherhood was under hatches till, quote, God, by giving the Israelites kings, re-established the ancient and prime right of the lineal succession in paternal government. This is his business from page 12 to 19. And then, obviating an objection, and clearing a difficulty or two with one half reason on page 23, quote, to confirm the natural right of regal power. He ends the first chapter, I hope it is no injury to call on half quotation on half reason. For God says, quote, honor thy father and mother. But our author contents himself with half, leaves out thy mother, quite, as little serviceable to his purpose. But of that more in another place. Subsection 7. I do not think our author so little skilled in the way of writing discourses of this nature, nor so careless of the point in hand, that he by oversight commits the fault that he himself, in his, quote, Anarchy of a Mixed Monarchy, objects to Mr. Hunton in these words, quote, where first I charge the A, that he hath not given us any definition or description of monarchy in general, for by the rules of method he should have first defined. And by the like rule of method, Sir Robert should have told us what his fatherhood or fatherly authority is, before he had told us in whom it was to be found, and talked so much of it. But perhaps Sir Robert found that this fatherly authority, this power of fathers and of kings, for he makes them both the same, would make a very odd and frightful figure, and very disagreeing with what either children imagine of their parents, or subjects of their kings, if he should have given us the whole draught, together in that gigantic form he had painted it in his own fancy. And therefore, like a wary physician, when he would have his patient swallow some harsh or corrosive liquor, he mingles it with a large quantity of that which may dilute it, that the scattered parts may go down with less feeling and cause less aversion. Let us then endeavor to find what account he gives us of this fatherly authority, as it lies scattered in the several parts of his writings. And first, as it was vested in Adam, he says, quote, not only Adam, but the succeeding patriarchs had by right of fatherhood royal authority over their children. This lordship which Adam by command had over the whole world, and by right descending from him the patriarchs did enjoy, was as large and ample as the absolute dominion of any monarch which hath been since the creation. Dominion of life and death, making war and concluding peace, Adam and the patriarchs had absolute power of life and death. Kings and the right of parents succeed the exercise of supreme jurisdiction, as kingly power is by the law of God, so it hath no inferior law to limit it. Adam was lord of all. The father of a family governs by no other law than by his own will. The superiority of princes is above the laws. The unlimited jurisdiction of kings is so amply described by Samuel. Kings are above the laws. And to this purpose, see a great deal more which our author delivers in Bowden's words. Quote, it is certain that all laws, privileges, and grants of princes have no force but during their life, if they be not ratified by the express consent or by sufferance of the prince following, especially privileges. The reason why laws have been also made by kings was this: when kings were either busied with wars or distracted with public cares, so that every private man could not have access to their persons, to learn their wills and pleasure, then were laws of necessity invented, that so every particular subject might find his prince's pleasure deciphered unto him in the tables of his laws. In a monarchy, the lying must by necessity be above the laws. A perfect kingdom is that wherein the king rules all things according to his own will. Neither common nor statute laws, or can be, any diminution of that general power which kings have over their peon pie, or peon pie, by right of fatherhood. Adam was the father, king, and lord over his family. A son, a subject, and a servant or slave were one and the same thing at first. The father had power to dispose or sell his children or servants. Once we find that in the first reckoning up of goods in Scripture, the manservant and the maidservant are numbered among the possessions and substance of the owner, as other goods were professed. God also hath given to the father a right or liberty to alien his power over his children to any other, whence we find the sale and gift of children to have been much in use in the beginning of the world, when men had their servants for possession and an inheritance, as well as other goods. Whereupon we find the power of castrating and making eunuchs much in use in old times. Law is nothing else but the will of him that hath the power of the Supreme Father. It was God's ordinance that the supremacy should be unlimited in Adam, and as large as all the acts of his will, and as in him, so in all others that have supreme power. I have been fain to trouble my reader with these several quotations in our author's own words, that in them might be seen his own description of his fatherly authority, as it lies scattered up and down in his writings, which he supposes was first vested in Adam, and by right belongs to all princes ever since. This fatherly authority there, or right of fatherhood, in our author's sense, is a divine, unalterable right of sovereignty, whereby a father or a prince hath an absolute, arbitrary, unlimited, and unlimitable power over the lives, liberties, and estates of his children and subjects, so that he may take or alienate their estates, sell, castrate, or use their persons as he pleases, they being all his slaves, and he lord or proprietor of everything, and his unbounded will their law. Our author, having placed such a mighty power in Adam, and upon that supposition founded all government and all power of princes, it is reasonable to expect that he should have proved this with arguments clear and evident, suitable to the weightiness of the cause. That since men had nothing else left them, they might in slavery have such undeniable proofs of its necessity that their consciences might be convinced and oblige them to submit peaceably to that absolute dominion which their governors had a right to exercise over them. Without this, what good could our author do, or pretend to do, by erecting such an unlimited power, but flatter the natural vanity and ambition of men too apt of itself to grow and increase with the possession of any power? And by persuading those who by the consent of their fellow men are advanced to great but limited degrees of it, that by that part which is given them they have a right to all that was not so, and therefore may do what they please, because they have authority to do more than others, and so tempt them to do what is neither for their own, nor the good of those under their care, whereby a great mischief cannot but follow. The sovereignty of Adam being that on which, as a sure basis, our author builds his mighty absolute monarchy, I expected that in his Patriarcha, this his main supposition would have been proved and established with all that evidence of arguments that such a fundamental tenet required, and that this, which the great stress of the business depends, would have been made out with reasons sufficient to justify the confidence with which it was assumed. But in all that treatise, I could find very little tending that way. The thing is there so taken for granted, without proof, that I could scarce believe myself when upon attentive reading that treatise I found there so mighty a structure raised upon the bare supposition of this foundation. For it is scarce credible that in a discourse, where he pretends to confute the erroneous principle of man's natural freedom, he should do it by a bare supposition of Adam's authority without offering any proof for that authority. Indeed, he confidently says that Adam had, quote, royal authority, absolute lordship and dominion of life and death, an universal monarchy, absolute power of life and death. He is very frequent in such assertions. But what is strange, in all his whole Patriarcha, I find not one presence of a reason to establish this, his great foundation of government. Not anything that looks like an argument, but these words. Quote, to confirm this natural right of regal power, we find in the Decalogue that the law which enjoins obedience to kings is delivered ill the terms, honor thy father, as if all power were originally in the Father. And why may I not add as well, that in the Decalogue, the law that enjoins obedience to queens is delivered in the terms of honor thy mother, as if all power were originally in the mother. The argument, as Sir Robert puts it, will hold as well for one as to the other, but of this more in its due place. All that I take notice of here is that this is all our author says in this first or any of the following chapters to prove the absolute power of Adam, which is his great principle. And yet, as if he had there settled it upon sure demonstration, he begins his second chapter with these words, quote, by conferring these proofs and reasons drawn from the authority of the Scripture. Where those proofs and reasons for Adam's sovereignty are, bating that of honor thy father, above mentioned, I confess, I cannot find. Unless what he says, quote, in these words we have an evident confession of Bellarmine, quote, that creation made man prince of his posterity, must be taken for proofs and reasons drawn from Scripture, or for any sort of proof at all. Though from thence, by a new way of inference, in the words immediately following, he concludes the royal authority of Adam sufficiently settled in him. If he has in that chapter or anywhere in the whole treatise given any other proofs of Adam's royal authority other than by often repeating it, which among some men goes for argument, I desire anybody for him to show me the place and page that I may be convinced of my mistake and acknowledge my oversight. If no such arguments are to be found, I beseech those men who have so much cried up this book to consider whether they do not give the world cause to suspect that it is not the force of reason and argument that makes them for absolute monarchy, but some other by interest, and therefore are resolved to applaud any author that writes in favor of this doctrine, whether he support it with reason or no. But I hope they do not expect that rational and indifferent men should be brought up over to their opinion, because this their great doctor of it, in a discourse made on purpose to set up the absolute monarchical power of Adam, in opposition to the natural freedom of mankind, has said so little to prove it. From whence it is rather naturally to be concluded that there is little to be said. But that I might omit no care to inform myself in our author's full sense, I consulted his observations on Aristotle, Hobbes, and etc., to see whether in disputing with others he made use of any arguments for this his darling tenet of Adam's sovereignty, since in his treatise of the natural power of kings he hath been so sparing of them. In his observations on Mr. Hobbes's Leviathan, I think he has put in short all those arguments for it together, which in his writings I find him anywhere to make use of. His words are these, quote, if God created only Adam, and of a piece of him made the woman, and if by generation from them two, as parts of them, all mankind be propagated, if also God gave to Adam not only the dominion over the woman and the children that should issue from them, but also over all the earth to subdue it, and over all the creatures on it, so that as long as Adam lived, no man could claim or enjoy anything but by donation, assignation, or permission from him, I wonder, etc. Observations 165. Here we have the sum of all his arguments for Adam's sovereignty and against natural freedom, which I find up and down in his other treatises. And they are these following: God's creation of Adam, the dominion he gave him over Eve, and the dominion he had as father over his children, all which I shall particularly consider. So that is all to be said by Mr. Locke in Chapter 2. If you have any questions about what was said in Chapter 2, maybe questions about what was said in Chapter 1, or maybe there's a different legal topic you would like me to cover in a future lecture, go ahead and post those down in the comments, because the entire point of the Calhoun School of Law is to equip you with the necessary skills and information to combat any sort of lawfare that will be waged against you, your loved ones, or your hard-earned property. So please, if you have any questions at all, go ahead and post them down in the comments. Excellent. So my name is Caleb Glick. I'm a lawyer here in the great state of Texas with the Calhoun School of Law to bring you a lot of information that plenty of bad folks would rather you not have. I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and if not, while you're down in the comments, go ahead and let me know how I can do better so I can best serve that purpose of helping you. I hope you'll have a wonderful day, and until I see y'all in the next lecture for the next topic, I bid you all farewell.